it is important to be aware that a lot of times these behaviors we see related to food are not often intentional, or not often, just a disobedient behavior, or, a lot of times it's just biologically something that's going on inside of them that they can't control. And so really approaching them with a lot of compassion and empathy and curiosity is always so important.
Okay, so I have a lot of different relationships with adoptive and foster families, and I know that one challenge that sometimes families face is when kids are sneaking food.
Yeah.
And I know that relates to the term, what we say, food insecurity, right?
Yeah.
But I'd love
Yeah.
to hear, like, what are some of the reasons why kids are sneaking food, and what's something really practical that parents can do about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is one of the most common things that I hear as well. Um, and, so most of the time, and there again, there can be multiple reasons for this. But most of the time, when a child is sneaking food, it's either because of restriction, either because they're not allowed to eat those foods, or they're not getting enough food, um, or because they've experienced food insecurity in the past, and maybe they've experienced, whether it was an unintentional restriction where they just didn't have access to food, there wasn't enough money, or there wasn't anyone purchasing or supplying, providing it, or maybe even intentionally restricted, like as a punishment, or even as, if a parent withheld food or limited certain types of foods because of their own beliefs around food, or their own eating disorders, or, thinking their child needed to eat less, or whatever reason. So typically it starts from restriction, whether it was intended or unintentional. Um, and again, I don't want to just blanket statement and just assume anytime this is happening in your home, this is why. But again, kind of like you mentioned earlier, it is so important to be curious. So if you see this behavior, don't automatically assume you know what's going on. And definitely don't assume, oh, they're being rebellious and sneaky, and, there's another thing that they're doing wrong. It's just like there's a reason behind their behavior. And so try to be curious to understand what it is. And you may not know, they may not tell you, but just even asking them and approaching them with kindness and gentleness, and again, not in a shaming way, but just saying, like, hey, I noticed some wrappers in your bedroom, or I noticed this was missing. Like, can you tell me a little bit about, what's going on? And they may not even know. It may just be just something that they're doing, and it's just it's kind of a life-saving, just something that a habit that they've picked up. But most of the time, depending on their age and development, hopefully they can share a little bit about what's going on. And so I always recommend, if this is happening, again, be curious, talk to your child, try to understand where they are, be compassionate, and don't, just start dishing out punishments. But then work with them to find a solution and say, depending on why, if you find the reason, if it's because they're hungry, and they're not getting enough, then say, okay, well, let's make sure we have more available to you at meals and snacks. Um, One of the ways that I recommend serving, and this helps kids who struggle with overeating, and this helps kids who struggle with undereating, this helps picky eating, this kind of helps any issue, is family style meals, where when you serve meals, you offer a variety. Of course, you're not going to be a short order cook and cook a lot of different types of foods, but you have, your sides available here, your meat or your protein, maybe a salad, maybe some bread, but make sure you always have something that, at least there's at least one thing that they like, but then letting them choose how much, because, it's just funny to me to think, like, in adult scenarios, like, I mean, we do go to restaurants and they serve us a certain amount, but they don't expect you to eat everything on your plate. Or they're not going to reprimand you if you order more, if it's not enough. And if you go to a a potluck or somebody's house, like they're not going to tell you exactly how much you should be eating. And so it's kind of funny that we do that with our kids. Like we know exactly how hungry they're going to be at every meal.
That's
So
interesting.
yeah, I think it's important to really empower them and give them the ability to say, today I'm really hungry. I'm going to have extra serving of mashed potatoes or this, or I'm really not feeling that. I'm not in the mood for chicken right now. I'm just going to have these things. And so giving them that freedom to choose what they want. And again, that kind of is not addressing specifically sneaking food, but it can help to make sure they're getting fed enough food. And then a lot of times, so we have like a yes container in our pantry, and then there's certain foods that we have in our fridge that my kids like. They don't even have to ask me if they're hungry and they want a snack. They can have yogurt, string cheese, fruit, vegetables, and then there's some snacks that we have in the pantry that they always have access to, like granola bars, peanut butter crackers, stuff like that. So that they have that peace of mind of knowing if I'm, starving and then my meal isn't happening for another 4 hours, what am I going to do? I better have something saved so that that doesn't happen to me. So that kind of helps eliminate that. And then it could even be some kids have experienced, where siblings or other family members were stealing their food or taking their food. And so they really felt like they had to hide it to protect it. And so in that situation, if that's an issue, and I'm sure you've heard this, I feel like this is one thing in my foster care training I do remember them mentioning, but it's to allow them to have like a little container of non-perishable foods that they can keep in their bedroom, wherever they want to keep it. They can hide it if they want to, just so that they know they have something that is just for them, that nobody's going to take it. And that can a lot of times help give them some peace of mind. And again, they're not having to sneak it and hide it behind your back. Um, those are kind of two of the biggest ones, but yeah, mostly just not shaming them and making sure that you're really partnering with them, because at the root of it, it's most likely fear, and that's most likely the reason, fear of not having. And it takes time for them to establish that trust and consistency and a routine. And so offering them regular, consistent meals and snacks, showing day after day after day, week after week, month after month, you are going to provide their needs. You are going to always have groceries. And that can take time for them to build that trust. But just really being patient with them and partnering with them to make sure they feel secure is really important.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I love those very specific ways that, families can really try to get a handle on this, because it's kind of, the behavior is sneaky, and the fact that it happens kind of sneaks up on us, like,
Sure.
oh, there's more wrappers, or oh, just other things that pop up. So this is really, really helpful. Another thing I wanted to talk about is connecting the dots between kids that have grown up in difficult situations, maybe adoptive foster kids, maybe kids have experienced any form of like trauma, or really struggling with mental health challenges. So the kids that have come from hard places, as we say, and eating disorders, and the role of FASD, which is fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. What I've heard is that for folks who have a diagnosis or believe that they have experienced FASD, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, is when the child in utero was exposed to alcohol to the degree where it's impacting their health.
Mhm.
And that folks who have FASD have the a stronger propensity to have a disconnect between their body
Yeah.
and like their hunger system.
Hmm.
And some people, we can call that interoception,
And yeah.
all of that. But so that what that disconnect means is that these eating disorders can develop because they can literally disconnect from their feelings of hunger that would naturally tell them, okay, it's time to eat.
Yes.
Yeah, anything of that that you could speak to, I'd be very curious.
Yeah, yeah, it's very concerning when that happens. And it's interesting because with when it comes to interoception, like our internal body signals, there's other signals too, like when you need to go to the bathroom or when you're tired or when you're thirsty. But yeah, hunger is a really big one. And I've seen trauma in general impact that system. And so I have seen where some kids don't recognize when they're full. So kind of the opposite of what we see with FASD.
Right.
Um, and that could be a reason maybe some kids might end up sneaking food because they finish a meal, they still feel hungry, but they're not offered any more food. And so it is important to be aware that a lot of times these behaviors we see related to food are not often intentional or not often, just a disobedient behavior, or, a lot of times it's just biologically something that's going on inside of them that they can't control. And so really approaching them with a lot of compassion and empathy and curiosity is always so important. But yes, with FASD, and this is something I've really only just recently in the last year or so started learning more about. But I have heard, I mean, examples where it's really unsafe for an individual, even an adult, to live alone because they do forget that they need to eat sometimes. And so there's different things. Again, it depends on the age of the child and, in their scenario. Um, but also, kind of like what I mentioned with helping kids who are feeling hungry a lot or sneaking food, similarly, you need consistent routine for these kids too. So they need to just, it's like meals and snacks. It's just a part of our day. We're going to have, we wake up and we usually eat. It doesn't have to be like the exact same time. But I mean, we all know kids with a history of trauma thrive on structure. And if they like to know what to expect and what's coming. And so, really establishing a structure and a routine for these kids is so important, so that they know, like, this is a part of our day. Oh, this is the time. And if it's an older individual, a teen, or someone living on their own, like even setting up, a system like reminders on their phone, like every 3 hours or 2 hours, like, hey, you need a snack, or oh, it's time to drink some water. Having something real practical like that, or even if there are people in their life who can call them and text them and check in on them. But of course, if they're living in your home, then you're that accountability for them to try to help support and make sure that they are eating. And it can be really hard for people with a poor appetite to want to eat and to enjoy eating. So it's really important that you're not super restrictive and super, well, you have to make sure that you've had a fruit or a vegetable before you eat, you know, those chips or whatever else it is. And in those scenarios, you still want to be teaching them how to have a balanced, diet and how to get a variety, of course, but your primary focus is that they're nourished, that they have calories, because calories are what make them survive. So, kind of those having less, I guess, being more flexible with food is really important for individuals who are struggling with appetite and not eating enough. So, providing structure and routine, being a little more flexible and lenient with what they offer. And then, of course, if there are certain foods they really enjoy eating, like learning how to maximize nutrition and calories in those foods that they like. So, and sometimes people who struggle with appetite, it can be easier to drink something than it is to eat. And so, teaching them how to make smoothies or nutritious milkshakes. Like you can use Greek yogurt, you can use fruits and vegetables, you can use, full fat dairy. There's ways to get in a lot of calories and protein and nutrients in those drinks. And then for some people, especially if they're living on their own, and that can be cumbersome to do all of that. They do make, like, there's commercial drinks, nutrition shakes and things. You do have to be careful that you're not buying the ones that are meant for weight loss, because there are some that are meant to fill you, make you feel full, and not want to eat a lot. And so definitely I would encourage anyone to talk with their healthcare provider if they're experiencing this with their child or if they're experiencing this themselves, just to make sure they can partner with you and give you some recommendations and tools that help with your lifestyle. And if there are commercial things available, if you need something easier like that, they can give you some recommendations for what would be appropriate. Those are kind of my like quick tips, but there's a lot. I mean, that could be a whole episode,
A whole podcast all on its
Yes,
own. Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, this is your profession. Like, this is what you do is work with people. And so, if it were just like real simple, like, hey guys, do this,
Right. Then
then
everyone would just be okay.
maybe there wouldn't be enough for you to do. But there's
Right.
plenty of families that you're helping even today with, what you're sharing with us. So I think what I'd love to do to kind of round out our conversation is I loved how we kind of started where you were talking about family meals and the role of faith in that, because you were talking about
Yeah.
sharing moments of Advent with that family meal. And so, can you like kind of finish up our conversation here by talking about like where do you see beauty in the family meal and in your expression of faith during those times?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an important question. There's so much that I could say. So I guess my first thoughts are just even without just thinking of this kind of more in a secular sense at first, there's so much research that supports family meals. I mean, regardless of what food is being eaten at the table, there is so much data that shows that people who have regular family meals, not necessarily 7 days a week, but you know, several times, a few times throughout the week, consistently, just regular meals, they have much lower risk of, heart disease and other long-term health consequences. They have lower risks of psychological disorders, lower risks of, I guess I hate to call it risky behaviors, but just things like being, they're less likely to experiment with drugs or underage alcohol or things like that. There's just so many, physical and mental and psychological health benefits to just being together. There's a really awesome research study out of Harvard. It's the longest research study, like I think in the world to date, on longevity, on what really helps a person to live, have a long and healthy life. It's called I think it's called the Harvard Study on Adult Development. And they found, of course, they studied people across various socioeconomic backgrounds, various religions, various, um, eating and health patterns, stress and trauma, just kind of all. And they continued to research this. I think it started in the 1930s. And basically, what they found, of course, there are things like smoking and exercise and those things that can impact your long term, your survival and your health. But basically, the most important thing that they found was connection. That people who had long-term healthy relationships were the ones that lived the longest and had the best overall health. And like to me, I mean, that's just it gives me a lot of peace and also like, okay, well, this is what I really feel like most families this is foundational. Like, are we connecting with our kids? Do they know, do we have secure attachment? Do we have, when they're older, when they're adults one day, like, are they going to be able to trust me and come to me with things? Are they going to be able to form healthy attachments to other adults as they grow? Because that is going to help their long-term health more than anything. So that's even just from a secular lens. But then, of course, when it comes to our faith, I mean, we know that, the Lord created us for a relationship. And I feel like that's when people struggle the most, especially with mental health, is when they're isolated. And we can even live in the same house as somebody, but feel very isolated. I think especially with technology now, because we just assume, we're constantly busy, involved in whatever things, or talking to people online, but that's not the same thing as an
Right.
in-person connection with another human being. And so I think it's so important now, even more than it ever has been, that we are taking time to be with our kids. And I feel like meals are kind of one of the easiest times to do it because it is hard with our schedules to find time to be together. And so for us, that's kind of, that is, that is one thing growing up that I did have. I mean, my parents kind of modeled for me. We always ate dinner together basically every single night, unless there was a sporting event or something that interfered. But I mean, that was pretty much a priority. And so I'm so thankful for that. And I do have a great relationship with my parents. And so that is something that I'm fostering in our home. And again, yeah, I think it's how you kind of can check in with them and know what's going on in their day. And sometimes the meal can, some kids don't like that. Like, I'm not necessarily recommending that you're always like prying, like, well, tell me about what's your biggest struggle, or tell me,
Right.
sometimes that can feel a little stressful or overwhelming, and that might lower appetite and then make your kids less likely to want to eat. So, that's not necessarily a place to do it. It may work well for some kids, but it does open the door for that. And then, of course, I mean, we always pray before a meal, which just reminds us, and just to hear somebody else praying for you out loud. Like, we tell our kids we're praying for them. But when you actually pray with them and they hear you praying, it just reminds them that, oh, there is a God who hears our prayers. And hopefully, that's modeling for them and helping them in their relationship with the Lord and growing their desire to pray and spend time with Him. Um, so yeah, I don't know if I feel like I kind of just went all over the place with that a little bit, but
No,
hopefully
no,
that made sense.
that was really great. I
Uh,
wanted you to go all over the place.
okay,
That was
good.
awesome. No,
Okay.
in good ways. And yeah, because there is so much expression of our faith and who we are when we sit down together.
Yeah.
And I know there's probably families that are saying, I don't have time for that, or I can't do that every
Mhm.
night. Great. Can we do it like three
Start
or
with
four times a
one.
week? Yeah,
Yeah, even
yeah.
just
I
if you
love
don't do
that.
it at
Just start
all,
with
like
one.
start with what you can
Start with
and
one.
yeah, work
And
from
it
there.
might be like really awkward time. You might kind of stare at
Yeah.
each other like, hey, what's up?
Mhm.
But over time that will ease and it'll become a whole lot easier. And I love how some of our content can overlap here because we also recently talked to some folks from Screen Sanity, and they talked about
Oh,
ways to keep phones away from dinner time and that kind of thing. And so again, it's not meant to feel restrictive or like it's got to
right.
have all these rules, but I do love looking at how studies have shown over decades
Yes.
that just having that connection point once a day with the people that you share a house with, maybe it's not even a family setting, maybe it's you and your
Sure.
roommates, maybe
Yeah,
it's you and a couple of neighbors if you live by yourself, even those kinds of connections. And so
absolutely.
what's really cool, Madison, is that this is your expertise, like coming into what we do at James Trail, and it's just like this beautiful overlap. And oh my goodness, I'm really really thankful for our time together.
Yeah,
Really
thank you so
thankful.
much. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes we like to finish out by talking about where we see beauty in this season, but I feel like
Mm.
you've already shared some of that with your moments of Advent and your evening time with your family. And but if there's anything else that's popping up in your head about like things that you find are really beautiful in this season, I'd love to hear it.
Oh man. Yeah, I think it is just the whole purpose of connection kind of permeates my thoughts a lot. And thank the Lord for understanding trauma-informed care and learning about trust-based relational intervention, TBRI, and really seeing how important connection is just to humans in general, regardless of trauma history. But so recently, and I guess it was a year and a half ago, I quit my full-time job in order to kind of pursue this endeavor, but also around the same time, we were starting to see that we really needed to probably homeschool our kids. So I haven't been able to give as much to Nourish with Connection as I've really wanted to, as far as like supporting more families and, spending a lot of time. That's my greatest hope and long-term goal. But in this season, just because I've, I really have no idea like what I'm doing with it. I would never wanted to homeschool. Like that is not, I don't have an education background. That was
I
just not.
understand completely.
Yes, that was not where I wanted to go, but the Lord just it took a while, but he kept showing me that this was the path that he knew my kids where they needed to be. Um and anyway, it was hard at first, but it's just been such a sweet season. Like even though half the time I'm like, is this working? Like, is this the best thing for them? But then I'm able to see so much fruit of just our own relationships. Like we have spent so much more time together. And it's just been such a gift, like especially after having kind of been robbed of a lot of time with them because they were a little bit older when they came to us. And it's just been really sweet. And I know everyone can't do that, just quit their job to spend all day with their kids, but maybe just finding ways to carve out and prioritize some kind of time. And even if that is just your meal, your dinner meal with your kids, but just it's so fruitful and you'll never get that time back with your kids. And so just trying to really be present and realizing that they're growing up. And I'm really thankful for the time that I have with them.
Well, that's awesome, and I would say the same. I did not ever intend to, homeschool my kids, but that's where we landed because of what they needed and the season that they needed it, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But I will say, in connecting some of these dots with the meal, is that what we started doing is we made our family meal at lunch.
Oh, I love
And
that.
so that really eased up the evening into like extracurricular or just like a
Yeah.
chill meal or whatever. And it was a lot to manage, but it worked for us.
Yeah, that's
So,
great. That's great.
yeah.
Yeah, and be
So,
flexible. It could even be breakfast for some people, especially if
exactly.
people work in the evenings. It doesn't matter what time of day it is.
Exactly.
Just start somewhere.
Start somewhere.
Hmm.
Awesome. Well, thank you so
Yeah.
much, Madison, for joining us
Yes.
today. And man, you've given us a lot of really practical tips. We're going to have all of her links in the show notes. And to our listeners, we will see you on the trail.